Deep in the misty Ember Mountains, past the whispering pine trees and the singing river, there lived a dragon named Cinder. Now, most dragons in fairy tales breathe fire and hoard gold. But Cinder was quite different. He was a small dragon, not much bigger than a horse, with shimmering purple scales that caught the sunlight like a rainbow. His eyes were warm amber, like 2 golden coins, and his tail always curved up in a cheerful little swirl. But Cinder had a problem. Every time he sneezed, he burned something. Every time he laughed too hard, a small flame shot from his nose. And every time he was startled, a puff of purple smoke filled the air. Because of this, the animals of the valley thought Cinder was dangerous. The rabbits hopped away. The deer ran into the forest. Even the brave badgers dug deep into their burrows when Cinder came near. "I just want a friend," Cinder would whisper sadly to the mountain wind. The wind would rustle through the trees and bring no answer back. One cold autumn morning, Cinder was walking along the edge of the forest, kicking pine cones and watching the red leaves fall, when something shiny caught his eye. It was a toy, a small wooden horse with painted red spots and a little yellow mane. But it was broken. One of its legs had snapped clean off. It lay in the mud, all alone, as if it had been dropped by someone running very fast. Cinder picked it up gently with his claws. He turned it over carefully, the way he had seen the old mountain turtle handle a delicate pebble. "Poor little horse," he murmured softly. "Someone must really miss you." He looked around. The forest path stretched left and right, empty and quiet. No child. No footprints except old ones, half washed away by last night's rain. Cinder tucked the broken horse carefully against his chest, under his folded wing, and began walking, not sure where he was going, but knowing, somehow, that he needed to follow the feeling that had just lit up inside him like a tiny golden flame. It was the feeling of wanting to help. Cinder followed the winding path until he reached the edge of the village of Maplewood. He had never been to the village before. He had always stayed safely away, afraid his fire or smoke would scare everyone. But the broken horse in his wing felt warm. And Cinder's heart felt warmer. He crept slowly between the trees until he could see the cottage rooftops. Smoke curled from chimneys. The smell of bread floated through the air. Children laughed somewhere in the distance, a sound so joyful it made Cinder's tail swirl 3 times in a row. Then he saw it, a small, crooked wooden shed at the very edge of the village. A sign above the door read, painted in cheerful blue letters, "Hammer and Wrench Hash Old Barnaby's Toy Repair Shop Hammer and Wrench Hash." The door was open just a crack. Cinder peeked inside. The shed was the most wonderful place Cinder had ever seen. Every shelf was full of toys, teddy bears with stitched smiles, tin soldiers with painted helmets, spinning tops in red and gold, cloth dolls with button eyes, and tiny ships with cloth sails. Some were fixed and gleaming. Some were broken and waiting. In the middle of it all sat a very old man with white fluffy eyebrows and hands that moved like they had been making things all their life. That was old Barnaby. Cinder raised one claw and knocked softly on the doorframe. Top, top, top. Old Barnaby looked up. His eyes went wide. His white eyebrows disappeared into his hair. But, and this was the remarkable thing, he did not run. He did not scream. He simply tilted his head the way a curious robin does. "Well now," said Barnaby in a slow, deep voice. "I've fixed quite a lot of things in my life. But I've never fixed a dragon." "Oh, I'm not broken," said Cinder quickly. "But this horse is." He held out the little wooden horse with the missing leg. Barnaby leaned forward, squinting through his thick glasses. Then he smiled, a slow, sunrise kind of smile that spread all the way to his ears. "Come in, then," said Barnaby. "And mind your tail near the paint pots." Inside the workshop, Cinder sat carefully in the corner, his wings folded tight, his tail curled around his feet. Barnaby picked up the broken horse and examined it with gentle fingers. "Clean break," said Barnaby. "This can be fixed. Do you see this little groove here? A dab of strong glue, a clamp overnight, and this horse will gallop again." Cinder watched every movement with wide amber eyes. "How do you know how to fix things?" he asked. Barnaby chuckled. "The same way you know how to breathe fire, I suppose. It's just the thing you were born to do." Cinder thought about that for a long moment. And somewhere in his chest, a second small flame of feeling lit up, this one the color of purpose. Cinder came back to Barnaby's shed the next day. And the day after that. And every day for 2 whole weeks. Barnaby taught him everything he knew. He showed Cinder how different kinds of wood needed different kinds of glue. He explained that tin toys needed to be bent back slowly, a little at a time, or they would crack. He taught him that cloth dolls could be sewn with a curved needle, and that springs inside wind-up toys were like tiny sleeping snakes. You had to treat them with patience. Cinder was an excellent student. His claws, which had always seemed too big and too sharp, turned out to be perfect for tiny, delicate work. His warm dragon breath, carefully controlled to just a whisper of heat, could dry glue faster than any oven. And his purple smoke, which he had always thought was an embarrassment, turned out to be wonderful for polishing old metal toys until they shone. "You have a gift, Cinder," Barnaby said one morning, watching the dragon fix a tiny clockwork bird with incredible care. "Your fire doesn't have to break things. It can mend them." One rainy afternoon, the bell above the shop door rang. In walked a little girl named Pip. Pip was about 7 years old, with muddy boots and 2 red braids and a look on her face like the whole world had turned upside down. She was holding something in her hands, or rather, she was holding a pile of something. Something that had once been a toy but was now just sad, broken pieces. It was a china music box in the shape of a ballerina. The ballerina's head had snapped off. The tiny winding key was bent. The little mirror on the lid was cracked in 3 places. It looked like it had fallen off a very high shelf. Pip set the pieces on the counter. 2 fat tears rolled down her cheeks. "It was my grandmother's," she whispered. "It played a song when you wound it. I just wanted to hear the song one more time. But I knocked it off the shelf and now it's. She couldn't finish the sentence. Barnaby patted her hand. Then he looked over his shoulder. "Cinder, come take a look." Pip gasped when Cinder stepped forward. She stumbled backwards 2 steps. But then she looked at his eyes, those warm amber eyes, and stopped. "He's purple," she said, because it was the first thought in her head. "He is," agreed Barnaby. "And he is also the finest toy repairer in the Ember Mountains. So I suggest you let him look at your music box." Cinder bent over the broken pieces with great concentration. He examined each one. The head, the key, the mirror, the tiny mechanism inside. He breathed in slowly. Then he looked up at Pip. "I can fix this," he said quietly. "It will take 2 days. But when you come back, your ballerina will dance again. I promise." Pip stared at him for a long moment. Then, very carefully, she reached out and placed her hand on Cinder's claw. "Thank you," she said. And she meant it with every bit of her heart. Cinder worked on Pip's music box through the night. The rain had stopped, and the moon came out to watch through the workshop window. First, he carefully mended the ballerina's neck, using the thinnest thread of dragon fire to soften a special bonding resin that Barnaby had mixed. His claws trembled slightly. This was the most delicate work he had ever attempted. But he breathed slowly. He was patient. And one by one, the broken edges came together, clean and strong. Next came the mirror. 3 cracks, 3 separate pieces. Cinder held them up to the moonlight, studying how they had broken. Then, with the tip of his tiniest claw and a drop of crystal clear glue, he fitted them back together like a puzzle. When he breathed a single warm puff across the surface, the glue set perfectly. The mirror glittered like a frozen pond. But the winding key was the hardest part. It was not just bent. Inside the mechanism, one of the tiny gears had slipped. And the spring, that tiny sleeping snake, had been partially uncoiled by the fall. Cinder worked for 3 hours, using a claw thin as a needle, coaxing the spring back into its proper shape, resetting the gear, bending the key back degree by careful degree. At one point, deep in the quiet of the night, Cinder accidentally sneezed. A purple flame shot out and singed a corner of Barnaby's workbench. "Oh no!" Cinder leapt back in horror. The music box was safe. He had moved it aside, but the burn mark on the bench made him feel terrible. His eyes filled with hot tears. "I always mess up. I always burn things. I should never have." "Cinder." Barnaby's voice came from the doorway. The old man was wearing his nightcap and holding a cup of warm milk. He looked at the scorched bench. He looked at Cinder. "Do you know what the secret ingredient is?" Barnaby asked, sitting down slowly in his old armchair. "For the glue?" asked Cinder, confused. "For everything." Barnaby took a sip of milk. "It's caring. When you care about what you're doing, truly care, Your hands become kinder. Your patience grows longer. Your mistakes become smaller. And even when you do make a mistake, caring is what makes you try again. Cinder looked at his claws. Then at the music box. Then back at Barnaby. I care very much, he said softly. I know you do, said Barnaby. I can see it in the way you work. Now, try the key again. Slowly. You're almost there. Just before dawn, as the sky turned from black to deep blue, Cinder wound the little key one careful turn. A tiny sound filled the workshop. Ting, ting, ting-o-ling. The ballerina turned. Slowly at first, then smoothly, spinning in her tiny circle, her arms raised, her painted face serene. The melody, sweet and clear and old, floated up into the air like a soap bubble. Cinder sat perfectly still, listening. His tail curled into the tightest, happiest swirl it had ever made. It works, he whispered. It actually works. From the doorway, Barnaby smiled his sunrise smile. Of course it does, he said. You made it so. When Pip came back 2 days later and heard the music box play, she burst into tears. Happy tears this time, the kind that feel like sunshine. She clasped the music box to her chest and spun around 3 times right there in the workshop. How did you fix it? She asked Cinder breathlessly. It was in 100 pieces. 23 pieces, Cinder corrected gently. I counted. Pip laughed, and the sound was so bright and warm that Cinder's scales actually glowed faintly, the way fireflies light up on summer evenings. That afternoon, Pip went home and told her mother. Her mother told the baker. The baker told the schoolteacher. The schoolteacher told the mayor. And by the next morning, the whole village of Maplewood was buzzing with the news. There's a dragon at Barnaby's shop, and he can fix anything. They came one by one at first, then in small groups, then in a cheerful crowd that stretched all the way down the lane. Old Mr. Fenwick brought his son's broken kite, snapped frame, torn paper, tangled strings. The twins Bea and Bo brought their matching tin robots, whose wind-up legs had stopped walking. Young Thomas brought his wooden puppet with no strings. His painted mouth faded to almost nothing. Mrs. Plum the baker brought an old toy oven, a birthday gift from 30 years ago, whose tiny door had rusted shut and whose little chimney had crumbled. And little Felix, who was only 4 years old, brought a stuffed elephant with a missing eye and a floppy ear that had been loved so hard it had simply fallen off. Cinder looked at the mountain of broken, beloved things. For one small moment he felt overwhelmed, so many things, so many feelings attached to them. But then he took a deep breath, and the warm, purposeful flame lit up inside him again. Right, he said. Let's begin. The next 3 days were the busiest, noisiest, most wonderful days Cinder had ever known. He fixed the kite, stretching new paper across the frame and using his warm breath to seal the edges perfectly. It was stronger than the original. He uncoiled and reset the springs in the tin robots, and polished them with purple smoke until they gleamed. When the twins wound them up, they not only walked, they danced. He painted Thomas's puppet's face himself, mixing colors that Barnaby ground from berries and minerals, and restrung it with silk thread from a merchant's leftover spool. When Thomas pulled the strings, the puppet bowed so elegantly that everyone applauded. Mrs. Plum's little toy oven took an entire afternoon, because Cinder had to dissolve every spot of rust with a precise, gentle stream of warm breath, then oil every hinge, and rebuild the tiny chimney from modeling clay baked hard in his careful fire. When Mrs. Plum opened and closed the little oven door 20 times in a row, laughing like a girl, Cinder felt like his heart might actually lift off and fly. And for little Felix's elephant, Cinder sewed the floppy ear back on with tiny, invisible stitches, found a glass eye that matched the other, and stuffed a little extra cotton into the places that had been squeezed flat by too many hugs. When Felix pressed the elephant to his face and said, with complete seriousness, "Ellie smells the same," Cinder had to go to the corner for a moment because his eyes were doing something embarrassing. By evening of the 3rd day, every toy had been returned. Every child, and every grown-up who had once been a child, went home clutching their mended treasure. The lane was quiet again. Barnaby put his hand on Cinder's shoulder. I think, he said quietly, that this valley has never been happier than it is tonight. Autumn turned to winter, and the Ember Mountains wore thick cloaks of snow. But Barnaby's workshop was warm and bright, and there was always a queue of broken things waiting, and always Cinder, patient and careful, at the workbench. The village of Maplewood had changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way all good changes happen, like a tree growing, slowly, solidly, until one day you look and realize it has become something magnificent. The children, who had once fled from Cinder in the forest, now came running towards him. They brought him their toys, not just broken ones, but whole ones too, wanting to show him. They brought him drawings they had made of him, purple and gold and always with his tail in a happy swirl. Pip made him a scarf from blue wool that she knitted herself, and it was a little lumpy and one end was longer than the other, and Cinder wore it every single day. The grown-ups began to trust him too. The baker left him a warm meat pastry every morning on the workshop step. The schoolteacher asked him to come and talk to the children about how things were made, and Cinder, who had never spoken in front of more than 3 people in his life, was so nervous that a puff of smoke came out of his nose at the start, which made all the children giggle, which made Cinder laugh, and then it was fine. It was all perfectly fine. One winter evening, as the first snowflakes fell outside, Barnaby called Cinder to his chair by the fire. The old man looked smaller and more tired than usual, but his eyes were bright. "Cinder," he said, "I have something to tell you." Cinder sat down, wrapping his tail around his feet. "When I was young," said Barnaby slowly, "I prayed that someone would come after me. Someone who would keep this shop going. Someone who understood that a broken toy is not just a broken thing. It is a broken piece of a child's joy. And that mending it is like mending a tiny piece of the world." He reached under his chair and brought out a small sign, freshly painted, and held it up for Cinder to read. "Dragon Barnaby and Cinder's. Toy Repair Workshop Dragon. No toy too broken, no dream too small." Cinder stared at the sign for a very long time. His amber eyes were very bright. His tail made the most extraordinary swirl it had ever made, a full 3 loops in one direction, and then a happy spiral back. "Partners," said Cinder. "Partners," said Barnaby. Outside, the snow fell soft and steady on the village of Maplewood. Inside the workshop, the fire crackled. The shelves were full of mended things, things that had once been lost, or broken, or forgotten, and were now whole again, waiting to bring joy. And at the center of it all sat a small purple dragon with warm amber eyes and a tail in a perpetual happy swirl, carefully, lovingly, fixing something that someone somewhere deeply needed fixed. Because that, it turned out, was exactly what Cinder had been born to do. Not to burn things. Not to frighten things. But to mend them. And as the snow whispered against the window panes and the village lights glowed gold in the dark, Cinder looked around at the workshop, at the tools, the toys, the fire, the shelves full of waiting wonders, and he felt, for the very first time in his whole life, a feeling so complete and so warm that it took him a moment to understand what it was.